This podcast has been brought to you today by standingtallnz.org.
Kia ora, and welcome to our very first standingtallnz.org podcast. I'm Dr. Alexander Stevens, Te Tuaroa. Welcome aboard, Finau, as we talk about a myriad of pānui, of issues relating to the topic of supporting our bros, support people, and community services affected by sexual violence. In our very first podcast, I have our volunteer, Pacific liaison person, and all-rounder, Sione Finau, with us. Kia ora, kia ora.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you don't have a choice, my friend. We have to do this as part of our launch, but it's good to have you here, albeit by force.
Yes.
We thought that perhaps the very first podcast actually might be an area that's really under-resourced and underdeveloped, and that's about support people who have heard a disclosure and don't know what to do about it. So traditionally, you'll find that, of course, we focus on our bros or our wahine that have been affected by sexual violence, but I actually wanted to do a little bit of a 360 and actually talk about something like what is it about our support people that they struggle with hearing a disclosure? What are some of the challenges that they find? At some point, we'll definitely focus on talking about our bros. And Johnny, let's start by having a bit of a kōrero around what was it that brought you into this field before we talk about support people.
So how I came into standingtallnz.org?
Sure.
Now, this is a funny story. Before I was volunteering for a Pacific youth group.
That will remain nameless because they lost their funding and don't exist anymore.
This is just the first round there.
No, this is going to be because we're about genuine, raw conversations. So,
all right.
But you worked with this organization.
And we were doing some stuff around vaccination. So there was some stuff done around health for Pacific communities. So they found that there was lower rates of vaccinations for Pacific communities, and I volunteered with them. There was a point where they were going in a different direction, and then I was kind of into it, so I stayed. And at the time, I was just sort of networking here and there concerning people that would be a good partnership with. And then another side story is I went to support one of my friends at her graduation, and this was the sort of first graduation coming back from COVID and the whole pandemic that happened. So in that period, that's where I saw you. And that was actually quite funny because some of the PhD...
But just for context, Sione was supporting, a whānau member, a friend?
Oh, yeah, friend, yeah.
At an AUT graduation that I was attending as a PhD graduate. So I rocked up to get my tohu, my qualification.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in the audience...
Yeah, it was me.
You were there.
It was me. And they get to share their titles and what their work was. Now, the thing I didn't realize was I read your title, but there was only certain keywords that I picked up. So I think your PhD title was standingtallnewzealand.org, a psychology website.
That's right. That's right. A psychological approach to creating e-learning website.
No, e-health. And supporting Māori and Pacific men. Now, all I remember seeing was e-health, Pacific and Māori, and then I was like, I need to connect with this man. Clearly didn't even read the sexual violence. So at the time, that's when I sent you the LinkedIn request, and then
can I just say, jumping in, I got your LinkedIn request, and I just thought, what the dodginess is this? Here's this person that says that they've been to my AUT graduation and they wanted to meet. Because actually, what you might not know, Sione, is I had like 5 or 6 disclosures from people that were at that graduation.
Yeah.
That had gone through the Standing Tall website and said, "Oh, we were at the graduation and we've been affected by sexual abuse." And one of the things that I was thinking at that time was, I can't even get a break from my graduation.
Yeah.
That there are these poor men.
Mm.
So it actually still brought it home that, it doesn't matter what environment you are. If there's an opportunity for our bros to come forward, they're going to take it. So when I got your LinkedIn request saying something completely different, like, "I'm really interested in this topic, can I meet with you?" I just thought that this was...
When I said interested in this topic, I think at the time I actually had no grounding understanding around sexual violence, especially in New Zealand. All I saw was e-health, and I was like, "Oh, health, Pacific and Māori. Let's connect."
Let's connect. And we did, right? And we've been doing this for what now, 2 years?
Something like that, yeah.
Something like this.
We've,
transitioning you from sport and rec, which is a noble profession.
Yep. And now we're in the...
And now transitioning you into mental health and addictions.
Yeah.
That's not to say that that's where sexual violence, belongs. I mean, sexual violence goes across the board. But it just so happens that that's my background. And I thought, actually, if you're going to do this work, then, if this is something that you're interested in, why not? It's pretty complex stuff.
So I only have, 2 years of experience around sexual violence in New Zealand, which is pretty young. Yeah, I actually didn't know much about it.
And yet I still think that it will help manaki your profession, as a drug and alcohol clinician, because the reality is the sexual violence is a massive topic in this country. Do you remember the stats that affect our Māori and Pacific men?
1 in 5 Pacific men and 1 in 4 Māori men.
Yeah, approximately. And just recognizing that still we don't have exact figures. So those figures were a combination from my PhD and the previous work that I had done working at Rape Prevention Education. So, given a bit of a background in terms of who you are, and that you accidentally fell into this space, although I sometimes think in Wairua, in spirit, actually you might have ended up here in a roundabout kind of way. One of the challenges that we have is dealing with sexual abuse disclosures, right? So what are some of the challenges that you think our support crew face, or support crews support people? What are some of the challenges that they face supporting our bros that have been affected by sexual abuse?
Because in Māori and Pacific communities, it gets put under the carpet. The conversation gets avoided. We actually don't know how to deal with it, and all we know how to do is avoid, put it under the rug. And I guess it leads to things where families are kind of having sort of bad relationships here and there. And again, finding their own communities that they can relate to. And sometimes that can even mean leaving to join gangs for some of them that are affected, or crime, or something else. But it's not always the case. It's just instances here and there. And I guess that's the main challenge there. We've just kept avoiding the conversation for so long. We actually don't know how to deal with it. So yeah, that's my understanding.
And I know that the word Pacific is such a general word that defines multiple groups across Polynesia, but what's a Pacific perspective around discussing sexual abuse or sexual violence? Is it a thing that's done easily? Are there challenges? What are your experiences?
Yeah, again, I actually had no clue of sexual violence back. I knew what rape was, but I only knew it in the context that females were raped. Nothing else. Nothing about men. So coming into this, I think it's like multiple reasons. Sometimes it can come to Pacific values around respect.
Around the barriers or challenges, or...
like the conversation is sometimes, well, in respect, you gotta respect the elders, and talking back to them as a sign of disrespect.
Right.
Or sometimes just trying to have a conversation, maybe cited as disrespect from the elderly perspective. When you're just trying to raise a concern of a family member or someone that's been abused. And then the elders, maybe they have a difficult time with having this conversation. So what they'll do is, no, you're too young to talk about this, and then it gets avoided.
Well, what about the topic of sex? I mean, how's that discussed in a Pacific context? If we were going to go one step back, right? So if we're going so if we go, to me, I think one of the challenges within our Māori and indeed our community in particular is that we don't talk about sexual abuse because we have trouble talking about sex.
Yeah.
Right? And acknowledging that you have one perspective amongst other perspectives in the community. What about that topic of sex? How is that seen first and foremost discussed within Pacific society?
Yeah, I'm going to have to say that the relationships between parents and kids may not be that type of relationship to talk about sex. So it's not really normalized from what I'm seeing. Just because my parents came straight from Tonga and then came to New Zealand and then they brought their teachings from Tonga. It might be the same case with the other islanders. And I think, sex is probably a taboo topic to have, around, especially around males and females, so brothers and sisters being in that conversation. But yeah, it's a tough conversation to have.
Really. So then, given that
sexual violence is an even harder subject to tackle. Because like relationships, knowing who did the abusing, and that's a tough conversation because it might be family members, and that's probably a conversation that not many can have, and that's a tough thing to have.
It is tough.
Yeah. Or not family members, but maybe some family friend, a friend that's been part of the family for such a long time, and it's just that relationship that person has with him, and the history that you might have together.
Well, that's an important thing because most people assume that sexual abuse or rape is often done by strangers, but actually most of the abuse, the victim often knows the offender.
Yeah, I can't quote, but I know that is the thing. I just don't know, I guess probability wise. It's tough to say.
You mean within your particular area? Yeah.
Experience? Just my perspective here. Yeah. I haven't looked into that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, you're still on your fledgling journey, right?
Yeah, 2 years and going.
And then we'll just have to add another 18 years and then see how...
Let's see where we go.
See how motivated you are to keep going. I mean, seriously, out of all the subjects that you could have taken, why did you decide sexual violence was going to be something that you wanted to, or recovery? You know, what was it about sexual violence recovery that you thought this is something that I really want to kind of put my flag in and just give it a go?
I think it's mainly because of you. You gave me the opportunity volunteering with Standing Tall NZ.org, and then it was just from there where I kind of grew an understanding and see how sexual violence may be the start of all the bad stuff that's just been happening as a result of now. So the Royal Abuse report, whanaketia. Now they mentioned something interesting where those boys that came from state care were sexually abused, and many of them, as a result, joined the gangs that we know of today.
That's right.
Yeah. Yes. So that's one of their findings in that huge report. So it's like, had we dealt with this earlier, we could have saved millions and at New Zealand's cost, because now government spending and crime prevention.
Yes. It's a multi-billion-dollar problem.
Yeah. So I don't know, if we talked about sexual violence from the very beginning, all this could have been avoided. But here we are trying to clean up the aftermath.
Yes.
And it's like, do we start from there or do we start from where it began? So I think sexual violence is the origin of where pain started. And if we deal with the origin...
Well, for many of our bros, right?
Yeah. And then we can deal with this impact that came with it.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about how do we How do we support our support people that hear a disclosure, Sione?
So on the Standing Tall New Zealand.org website, under the For Our Support Crew, we have this acronym called RAVI.
Which is Sanskrit, which is an Indian language for the word light. So Ravi actually means light.
Oh, nice. And it's bringing the bros from the dark
Yeah,
into the light.
yeah.
Oh,
Some of it came from working with our bros that are Afakasi. So Indian Māori, Tongan Māori, Cook Island Māori. Yeah,
true.
yeah.
Oh.
So that's where that's where the term Ravi came from anyway.
Oh, that learn something new every day. So yeah, Ravi is used as a tool, you could say, to deal with disclosures. RAVI. R is respect. So sometimes for the bros, it can be very hard to come out with this disclosure, because of all the, I guess, all the stuff that's happened to them. Many of times they probably did try and raise the concern when they were younger.
Well, there's three key ages that my research shows. One is the ages of between 5 and 7. Now, they don't necessarily say the words, I have been sexually abused.
Yeah.
But they'll try to voice it the best that they can, as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they get stuck. It's like their whole body kind of cramps up. So they try their best to...
So the communication. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Not laughing about the topic.
No, he's having a cramp right now. So his whole body is just so offended by what's happening. Breathe it out, brother. Breathe it out.
Hydrate.
Yeah, hydrate. But the ages of 5 to 7 is the first age where our bros will tend to kind of come forward first. Then it's in their mid-20s, often as a result of finding out that they're going to be a dad for the first time. And if they're not believed then, say, late 20s, early 30s, if they don't say anything then they'll tend to not say anything until the end of life scenario.
Yeah.
Where they are wanting to not necessarily disclose, but I call it a spiritual release. And we talk about Wairua in the second podcast, but looking at a spiritual release. So they might be on dialysis. They might be on, perhaps they might have cancer. They have something which is going to end them.
Yeah.
And so they try one last time to reach out in the hopes that someone will believe them before they die.
Yeah, I guess brings back to what we mentioned earlier, the whole communication between children and parents in regards to sex and sexual violence is a tough thing to have.
Yeah.
So yeah, respect is a very important thing to have.
And not to panic.
Not to panic. What do you do with this information that you have? All we can say is don't panic.
First and foremost,
yeah.
I think it's tempting to for some people, they try to go into solution mode, but it's just not helpful because most times guys want to test the water out. So part of that Ravi analogy, I guess, is respect.
Yeah. And A is next, which is aroha and avoid judgment. When you disclose something, sometimes you may want to ask questions like, why didn't you tell me beforehand? Why didn't you stop it? This happened years ago. Why aren't you over it?
Yeah. Exactly.
Why did this happen? Did you wear something?
Why couldn't you stop it?
Yeah.
And it's really tempting for us to support people to kind of go in there with more questions, which actually does more harm than good.
Yeah.
Right?
I think the bros just want someone to listen to their struggles. And it's sometimes for them, it could be a hard journey.
Yeah.
And
I call it a verbal upchuck.
Verbal upchuck.
A verbal upchuck. So as a counsellor, I tend to put on like an invisible apron. And then we sit down and look at each other. And I think, oh, here comes the verbal upchuck. They're just going to they're going to vomit out whatever.
Yeah.
They're going to vomit out whatever they've got on them. And so those questions that you might be tempted to ask aren't helpful to them in terms of thinking about aroha. Actually, one of the best things that you can do, just in terms of giving them respect and then aroha is giving them just a bit of space to kind of process the fact that you might be maybe the first or even second person that they've told.
Mm.
Which is a side note we need to do more research on. Is just understanding what are the factors that lead up to people disclosing. Because we don't actually know what is it about, like for me, before I took this mahi on, I'd received dozens of disclosures of my work in health,
Yeah.
and I could never understand why. Right, so when I worked in smoke-free, when I worked in drugs and alcohol, mental health, I could kind of understand because there were some questions that said, what led you to accessing our service, so that I could understand, when people gave me a disclosure there. But if it was, say, when I used to work in smoke-free services, I would say to someone like, what was the first memory that led you to smoke?
I guess.
And then they would say, oh, I was abused by
Yeah.
my uncle.
Yeah.
And I took a cigarette to cope, and I was thinking at that stage, I was in my early 20s, and I thought, there's something in this manual that's going to help me with this.
Oh, true. There's no. Oh, yeah. I guess
Because the focus was on smoking, not sexual violence.
Trauma and abuse.
Yeah.
And I think with the addiction that comes with, it's not just smoking. There's drinking.
Yes.
Sometimes food used as a coping mechanism.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's lots of different ways that people kind of deal with it, right?
Mm.
Anyway, we've gone slightly off track, but I suspect during this whole podcast series we're going to be doing this. But in terms of aroha, though, I think just the bros telling us can be the first step before they kind of consider what their next move is. So once we transition past respect and aroha, that gives us V for...
validate. Validate that you hear them and offer support.
So what does that look like?
Yeah, just saying, well, pretty much validating what they said. They've been abused, and you can validate and offer support by saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
And be genuine.
And yeah. Sorry, to me, it's just a
record. That again.
Yeah, try and be genuine with how you work with disclosures. And offer support. Offering support is providing the free services available in Aotearoa New Zealand. And to find them, hop on our standingtallnewzealand.org website, and you'll find it in the resource tab. You can also contact us. We have our email in the standingtallnz.org website, and we can provide at the email, which is alexander@standingtallnz.org. Alexander@standingtallnz.org. So yeah, you definitely have there's definitely resources out there to help our Māori and Pacific men affected by sexual violence.
Most of them are available for free. Just say that they are primarily Pākehā services. So sometimes I think, and what I mean by that is sometimes if they're given a Māori or Pacific name, sometimes our communities might assume that they're going to access support for Māori and Pacific and find out that it's not. So Tautoko Line is a good example, although they do have Māori and Pacific therapists. But if you or someone that you know doesn't want a Māori and Pacific therapist, you can actually request, that you might want to see a Pākehā person. You can also ask to hear back from either a male or female. So there are options. So validating that you hear them, giving them that space, sometimes even saying to them, hey, look, what do you want me to do with this information? Is incredibly useful as well, because it kind of lets you know what is it that, you're going to do, what your responsibility is.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you're new to this, Sione, but one of the things I want you and everyone listening to this is that support people are probably going to be the most valuable asset that a bro affected by sexual violence can have. Because one of the challenges that we know is trying to access help, and sometimes our bros don't want to. So support people, well, they're vital. They're kind of like the oxygen that they need when our bros feel that they can't breathe in that moment.
Yeah.
Especially when getting help. And yet, I think that this actually leads quite nicely in terms of that RAVI acronym to I for Integrity, which is also around knowing your limits.
Yeah. And I think just be upfront as well if you don't know. Just say, I hear you, and I'm so sorry I don't know what to do with this information,
Yes.
but let's work together and
Yeah.
see what we can do.
And that could be enough.
Yeah.
You don't need millions of dollars to be able to show integrity and being able to know what your limits are.
Mm.
There are lots of examples that I can think over a 20 plus year history where I was thinking of a sibling, of a sister and brother, where the brother was admitted into mental health. They both had been sexually abused by their uncle, but that sister was such a big support person.
All it takes is one person, eh?
Yeah, one person, and she got him out of mental health services. Said, you know what, this is actually making him more sick, more
Mm.
unwell. Actually, I'm gonna discharge him, and her and her husband, invested heavily.
What was
And
the outcome of that one again? I read it.
yeah,
Can't remember.
he ended up finding a way forward
Oh, nice.
without necessarily relying on our mental health services.
Mm.
But what I often say is that people take a different journey,
Mm.
so I'm not saying that mental health services don't work. Some do. So it's a different journey. Anyway,
Mm.
again, we're slightly off topic here, people. But I mean that this is what sexual violence does, right? Is that
Yeah.
there's no linear path.
And I
It's
guess,
all over the place.
and I guess with this disclosure, sometimes it's a series of different meetings and engagements. So if you don't get the disclosure all up in one sort of meeting, it's pretty normal to have it broken up.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it just needs more time and space to sort of deliver this disclosure, depending on how the person may give
Yeah,
the
and so
type of
and so
disclosure.
you might be one of those people that just need, one of the things that you might do if you thought about that Ravi approach, integrity is saying, hey, look, I'm here for you. Let me know. Sometimes guys, like I said, initially the stages are just wanting to tell someone.
Mm.
So I say to support people, if you receive or hear a disclosure in sexual abuse, you might not feel it, but you are actually special, and then that person has chosen you to do a
Mm.
verbal upchuck. You might not have your invisible apron like I do to help you kind of deal with it, but there is something about you that they trust.
Mm.
And actually, you might be the very first person that's ever going to believe them,
Oh, and
which is
the
huge.
next thing is don't force support on them.
Yes.
Um, Again, they're going to need time and space to sort of accept it. And I guess when you provide these resources, whatever response you get is completely normal. Whether they decide they don't want to, they probably will go off at you,
Or
or
maybe
maybe not. But
sometimes they go into like their man cave. So at the
mm,
moment, generally what happens is slight shift again. But when I'm dealing with guys for the first time, their very first counselling session with me,
mm,
most guys take a couple of weeks before they come back and see me because
oh,
they're processing what's happening.
yeah,
Sometimes they'll message me and they're like, "Oh God, I can't believe I finally told someone and they actually
believe me.
believe me." And so at that time, if they've got a partner, I might say to them, "Hey, have you spoken to does your partner know?"
Mm,
Because one of the things that comes up from a support person's perspective, when you said how why aren't you over it yet?
oh yeah,
How long
yeah.
will it take? I mean, those are not helpful.
Mm,
And so, what I say to people is, hey, look, if you've got people around you that might know what's happening, let them know that you're also getting help. Let them know that you're going to feel the Māori word is wanga wanga, which is kind of like a little bit, all over the place.
mm,
Um, and that the support person's role actually might be just to understand, hey, their loved one, their sibling, so on and so forth, is actually tackling this, and they really need you right now
mm.
to show some grace. And even if they annoy you and make you hoha, which is another beautiful Māori word, hoha means to make you to be upset, to be ticked off. In that moment, they absolutely need you. So I guess that kind of brings us to the next question, Siona, is around one of the questions that comes up, of course, is how long will it take for him to recover?
Yeah.
Acknowledging that we're hearing sirens in the background. That aren't special effects either. That's just what happens when you live in South Auckland, people.
We're on a tight budget
Yeah,
here,
then
so
you'll hear the helicopter fly over soon enough. But in terms of how long will it take for him to recover?
there's actually no way of telling how much time a person needs.
Mm.
It's all dependent on that person. So yeah, that's a tough one to ask. Sometimes it would take weeks, months, years.
Years. I always say it's like an individual thumbprint. It's specific to that person.
Mm.
And you're right. Sometimes, and again, this needs more research, from the limited experiences that I can recall, sometimes one session might be enough, just that upchuck.
Yeah.
Might be enough for them to think, actually, that's enough. Other people, some clients I've worked with 5 years plus, don't see them again, come back maybe a year or two later.
Mm.
So it is a VAR or WA, it's a time and space.
Yeah.
Time and space deal. Do you want to talk a little bit more about Standing Tall in terms of what they can offer and what that support might look like?
Yeah, so standingtallnz.org, we cater to generally Māori and Pacific males affected by sexual violence. But however, on the website, we do offer some services that could be of use, such as ACC, Lifeline, Healthline, suicide crisis, so on and so forth. Please look onto the standingtallnz.org free helplines services, and yeah, the website can offer some things. And with this episode is the direction that standingtallnz.org is going with e-learning. So one of the ways that we'll be I guess supporting communities and Māori and males affected by sexual violence is through our website delivering e-learning content. And yeah, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, so yes, we primarily work with our Māori and Pacific men, but then we also do something that many other organizations might not do so openly, is that we also support people, which is what's led to this podcast. And then we also work with community organizations that might hear a sexual abuse disclosure from one of their clients. Like recently, there was one where a supermarket rang me. Manager had rang me because the checkout operator had seen the offender and had a bit of a meltdown. So they were looking for support in terms of what that might look like. Now, that person was a wahine, but to me, every door should be an open door to access help. So they were female, and so I was able to then refer them to another service. And what we also do is also advocate, for people to get the right kind of service and treatment as well. So given that, Sione, I guess that's our first one kind of off the bat. Final thoughts?
Yeah, no, interesting.
This podcast has been brought to you today by standingtallnz.org.